Before you listen to this episode of the Football Journeys podcast with yet another inspiring guest, we have a few favours to ask. The success of this podcast depends on its reach. If you enjoy the podcast, please do what you can to promote our hard work. Give us a 5-star rating, leave a nice review, tell your friends, or promote us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Threads, and we're still on the other place too. Find us on @JourneysPod. You might even find us on TikTok these days. Even just a like on our clips, trailers and posts can boost engagement and bring more listeners. Please, please, please spread the word. And if you know any brands or organisations who share our values and who might be interested in partnering with us, then please do put them in touch. Or if you know someone who has had an inspiring football journey, get in touch to tell us more. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at footballjourneys@b5consultancy.com.
Welcome to the Football Journeys podcast with me, Matt Hemsworth.
And me, Fraser Franks.
Look, we're
and me, Peter Moore.
Well, do you know what? There's so many things I want to talk to you, Peter, about putting yourself out there. And there's a quote from you said, "Never afraid to make a fool of myself." And I don't mean that you just made a fool of yourself there, but there's something really engaging and wonderful, warm, and open about the way you've always presented yourself. We're going to talk to you about a long and distinguished career. I say I won't embarrass you about your age, but you're usually quite upfront about that. You talk about your first game at Anfield in 1959. You've been around for a long, long time. You've had a career that's started as a baby in Liverpool, took you to Wrexham. You've been a PE teacher. You've worked for shoe brands. You've worked for tech companies. You've been the CEO of Liverpool. There's going to be a hell of a lot to talk about. So, Peter Moore, we were going to meet you in Liverpool when you have one of your short forays over to the UK. We didn't get to meet you at the Anfield Wrap Studios, but it's just lovely to have you on Zoom. So, Peter, welcome to the Football Journeys podcast.
Delighted to be with you guys, and sending some sunshine over to the UK from here in Montecito, California, in the Santa Barbara Hills.
Yeah, well, let's rubbing it in. We're recording this as it's starting to. The nights are drawing in the UK, and certainly we're not enjoying any sun here. We always like to start. We always want to take you back, and I know it's such an important part of who you are. For those of our listeners that are listening rather than watching on YouTube, you've got red all behind you. Being a Scouser is everything to you. You've got the transatlantic twang, of course, because you've been over in the States for a long, long time. But born in 1955 in Liverpool. I wanted to take you back to those early days. And I know you've spoken about this before, but I think it's a really good way of starting it. Football came to you relatively early on, or at least the love of football. I think your dad gave you an option of whether or not you go to Anfield one day in 1959.
Yeah. My dad pulled my brother Andy and I together. This is in November of 1959. By then, we were in Garston in South Liverpool. And he said, "Look, I have a proposition." I'm sure he didn't say these words, but I have a proposition for you. But it's I've got one ticket for somebody to go with me to Anfield to watch Liverpool versus Leyton Orient. And I'll give the other one £0.50, which in those days was a king's ransom for lucky bags and sweets. My brother Andy immediately opted for the £0.50. I jumped on the opportunity to go with my dad to see us beat ultimately Leyton Orient 4-3 in November of 1959. One of the last games for Phil Taylor before Bill Shankly comes in the following month. Still languishing as a mediocre second division team in those days. But I was immediately hooked. Everything to this day, you can still feel it and smell it. I was in the paddock, so I couldn't see a darn thing as you might imagine, a 4-year-old. And paddock, way before you guys' time, had this big wall, and it was in what we now call the Sir Kenny Dalglish stand. And so, but I can still see peeking through Ronnie Moran, Jimmy Melia, all of these players that stayed with the club for a long time. And I was immediately a red. There was no going back at that moment. So that's whatever that is, 65 years ago.
I've actually written down investment in football. You and your brother had a choice. He took the immediate dollar or crown. You invested in football at that point. and actually, I tried to track my own. It's interesting. It's as long ago as 1959. I think for my sins, I support Gillingham. And I think my first game my dad took me was either 1989 or 1990. And I thought, hang on a minute, Leyton Orient. There's there's probably a decent chance it was against Leyton Orient, but it wasn't because Leyton Orient were in the division above us at that time. So I think the fact that it was not as long ago for me, and the fact that I can't remember means that you were perhaps lucky to have been born in South Liverpool, whereas I was born in Kent. So my first experience were maybe not quite so as positive as yours were.
Yeah, I mean it's something you once you go to that game. My dad reminded me for years afterwards of and unfortunately he passed away 25 years ago, but so never got to see me come back to Liverpool to be the CEO. But it becomes as part of a multi-generational support that so many football clubs around the world can benefit from, which is in my case, my granddad, my dad, me, my sons now, or my son, American, my daughters, all Americans who just love Liverpool. And we watch the game together, even though LA, I'm in Santa Barbara, they're in New York City. I got another one that actually lives in Liverpool. And so we're all congregate at this kind of moment we all get together as we did yesterday, to watch the Chelsea game. And we're constantly jumping in with each other and sharing notes and opinions on it. So it's the power of football, what it does in a social perspective. And through the wins and losses, the ups and downs. I Unfortunately, my dad in his later years had a stroke and could barely remember who I was. But when we would talk about Liverpool, it was the only thing at that point we had in common. His eyes would light up. So this was the
Wow.
complete circle of life. He took me when I was 4, and in his final years, that linkage back to Liverpool was the thing we talked about all the time, and the only real thing he could relate to that I was doing living in America.
It is, isn't it? I remember my grandfather. We lost him to dementia. He played for the old folks in town where I grew up, and we couldn't take him into the town centre without some old boy stopping him and saying, "You're Frank Hemsworth. I used to watch you." And then sadly, when my granddad had dementia, I remember we were chatting to him, and he couldn't really remember exactly who me, my dad, and my brother were. He introduced us to the nurses, his cousins, and he said that we were in the war together, which was quite a nice, sweet little chat. It was amusing, but it was sad as well. And then we started to talk about football, and I was working at a media law firm at the time, and that law firm had acted for Ryan Giggs in some quite unpleasant legal proceedings. But we were with Grandad, he had dementia, and I said, we've been doing a bit of work for Ryan Giggs, and he'd forgotten so many things, including who we were. And he popped up and went, "Oh yeah, left winger, Man United." And just how football came back to him so quickly during those times was quite incredible. And I kind of alluded to a slight jealousy I have of, I love my football club, but it doesn't evoke the same emotions as Liverpool does and the history that's behind it. And you've spoken a lot before about I recognise this a lot. I've spent a lot of time in Liverpool, but being a Scouser is some kind of superpower. That kind of cocky confidence that Scousers get. It's as I said, your accent might have changed over years, but there's something within you that will always be a Scouser, and it certainly helps you in your career.
Absolutely. I mean, when I came to this country, I had a tough time. I was an immigrant. It was 1981. I came to play football and coach football, and that wasn't going to pay the bills. And eventually got a job linked to football, selling Patrick football boots in Southern California. But there was a period there in the mid '80s where I was struggling. I just got married, already had a baby over here, and took stock of yourself, which immigrants do. Is what have I got that's different than a natural born American? I grew up in a pub, so I've got this sense of self-confidence that my dad put me behind the bar of the Red Line in Marford, just outside of Wrexham, when I was 11 years of age. All kinds of child labor laws being broken, but he felt comfortable with me at 5:30 when the pub opened. We knew the regulars from the Gresford coal mines would come in. I knew every one of them. I knew what they wanted, and he trusted me to for him to have a bit of a break until he came downstairs at 8 o'clock, and I went upstairs in the pub to do my homework. Secondly, I'm a Scouser. And so we do have this sense of self-confidence, misplaced at times, but this cockiness that we're different and we're a little outspoken. We think we're charismatic, not quite sure whether that bears out truthfully on a regular basis, but we have this warmth, I think, and sense of loving people that comes from the roots of Liverpool, the immigrant stories of Liverpool, the international port, and welcoming all races, all creeds for hundreds of years. And so this melting pot that was Liverpool. And so I had that, I carried that, and I've carried it all my life. And you may have seen my TED talk, which is the power of Scousenness. And so I
Mm.
had this ability gift of the gab, whatever you want to call it, to walk it. I'd never sold a thing in my life. I'm a PE teacher. But I'm selling shoes, romancing my Keegan golds, kangaroo skins, molded screw-ins, whatever, my Michel Platini supers, because I needed to make a living. And then finally, I was a PE teacher. So 3 times a day, I'm cajoling 40 boys to get out in the Welsh countryside with the snow coming in sideways to play football or rugby. And so you have this sense of to be able to persuade people to do things. And so that's the melting pot that I figured out that I was. And I thought, well, and I could kick a ball straight in those days. And I would go into these soccer stores around Southern California, LA, San Diego, all the way up to the Bay Area in San Francisco. These soccer stores would love somebody like me who could talk the game coming in. It was a rarity in those days. But also to be able to place their trust in me to write the right all the things they needed to as they were growing what's known here as mom and pop businesses, and riding the wave for decades of the game as it slowly took roots in this country. So yeah, I mean that roots of being from Liverpool, born, bred, proud. Family still lives outside of Wrexham, but I get back to I was in Liverpool, as you know, last week, and my personal charity there supports things like Alder Hey Children's Hospital, Clatterbridge Cancer, fan supporting food banks, because I owe it to the people. I stood on their shoulders, and whoever I am came from there. And so that is something that as we get older, and you alluded to that, I'll be 70 in a few months, and you look back and you say, okay, how did I get here? And who do I owe for that ride? And so a lot of people are arrogant and they think they did it all on their own, or they don't care. Those people are in the past, and I'm about me in the future, but I do, and Scousers do. You know this, Matt. I mean, you operate there. It's a warm group of people that will put their arms around you and help you out with the last half a crown, if necessary.
I've always found about the Scouse people that there's always someone there who will buy you a drink. They might also want a drink themselves, but they'll always buy you a drink, and that generosity of spirit always comes across to me. There's a song originally by the Dubliners, I think, was being covered by the Pogues, which frankly I think you might have even asked them to write it for you, because you talk about the immigrant culture in Liverpool. There was a huge influx of Dubliners, of people from Ireland. And I think it's called Leaving Liverpool, isn't it? And the opening bars is Farewell to Princess.
Yeah, the Leaving of
Liverpool. The Leaving of Liverpool. Thank you. Sorry. And it says, Farewell to Princess Landing Stage, River Mersey, fare thee well. I am bound for California, a place I know right well. I mean, is that a song you've always been aware of? And were you kind of quite aware of how profound that was when you did leave? Well, not Liverpool, you left Wrexham to go to California.
It's the title of my TED Talk. And the words you just spoke are on the first slide. And it ties into exactly who I am. My dad worked on the docks before he got a pub. My granddad certainly did. And as you point out, my great grandparents, all Irish, had come over as pretty much, if you can go back, if you're a Liverpudlian, go back 3 or 4 generations. It comes from across the water. And so the Leaving of Liverpool for me, albeit we'd moved a few miles away to Wrexham, but it was always we're Liverpudlians proud. It was not easy, but it was at the time in the late 70s. I started to go over when I was teaching PE. I would go over in the summers and coach soccer in Ohio and Kentucky and places like that. And this world of America during difficult times in Britain just opened my eyes to what opportunity could be. And it was of no disrespect whatsoever to my place of birth, but I felt as a Liverpudlian, I literally felt that I looked at Americans, I listened to Americans, as I can do this, and in fact, I felt I can do this better. And again, no disrespect to Americans either, but you also leverage the fact, which is an interesting little nugget you learn here as a Brit, is that, and I had a very English accent or a Liverpudlian accent at that time, is they just think you're smarter because you have a British accent. And if you just leverage that, in whatever you're doing, your personal life, your professional life, they're intrigued. There's an Anglophile on every corner that loves this culture. And when I arrived, it was Monty Python and Benny Hill, God forbid, but there was this sense of awareness of what Britain was about in the waning days of the empire, but also this
Mm.
allusion to a superior race. And that's the only way I can do it. I mean, obviously misinformed, but from the perspective of leveraging that. And there were times when I would walk into a soccer store in the early to mid 80s, and that accent would get a little thicker and a little bit more pronounced as I was showing the shoes at a 45-degree angle and stroking the leather this way. You just learn what triggers people in a good way. And particularly when you're a commission only sales rep, as I was, in other words, you don't sell shoes, you don't eat, you don't pay the rent, you don't
Mm.
feed your child. And so you learn to leverage every capability you have. And my scouseness was one of the tools in my bag to pull out.
I watched that TED talk. Sorry, Matt, I'll come in. I watched the TED talk earlier today just to kind of remind myself, and I love how myself and Matt talk about this as well, but almost using football as the vehicle. It isn't the be all and end all, but football has been the vehicle in almost everything that you've done.
Yeah.
And even taking that maybe slight adversity of wanting to be a player, then going into PE teaching, and then the various roles that you've gone on to, using that to create the unbelievable experiences that you've had, but to impact the lives you've had as well. And in that TED talk, there's a real humility that you see, which again I think comes from the roots that you talk about. But beneath it, there is a real self-belief and thinking really big. And if you take like a logical thinker and you take everything kind of out of context, you go, right, look where he's born, look what his circumstances are. He probably shouldn't go on to achieve this kind of thing. But the more I look at high achievers and try and get into the mindset of it, the more that this keeps popping up of there is like a delusional optimistic belief that no, I'm gonna do this. And you think differently to a lot of other people. Have you always had that? Have you always felt you've had that?
Think so. I mean, I go back, Fraser, to, the beats of my life is the first major beat was passing the 11 plus. To this day, I have no freaking idea how I passed the 11 plus. If I'd have failed the 11 plus, you wouldn't be interested in me and I wouldn't be talking to you right now. It's as simple as that. And this goes back to the mid 60s. 11 plus evolved a little bit decades on, but it was basically you pass this as I did, thank goodness. You go to all boys grammar school, Grove Park Grammar School for boys in Wrexham. You're on a path to university. Get your O levels, get your A levels, get to university. World's your oyster. You fail this, you're off to a comprehensive or a secondary modern, and you better get your tools ready to be a plumber or electrician or a carpenter, some technical trade. And that would, to me, to this day, I still shake my head. Now, I understand the circumstances that, the British government couldn't afford to give everybody the path to universities and what have you. But I've always had, and maybe from that moment, Fraser, just like, okay, I can do this type thing.
Mm.
Also have, but within that, in the background of that, you also have, which I had as my career evolved and changed, a little bit of imposter syndrome, which you have to overcome. And certainly, and we'll talk about this when I moved away from athletic footwear and sporting goods and at 44 years of age changed careers into video games. For those first 4 months, I always remember like lying awake at night and go, I have no idea what this is all about.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I'm senior vice president in charge of marketing for Sega. We're 9 months from launching a brand new console. And then 5 months later, I'm the president of Sega, all in the same year. So you do have and I think the imposter syndrome keeps you honest and challenges you, and make sure that you don't get ahead of yourself because then you end up of what's known as Peter principle, and the Peter principle is being promoted into obsolescence, and you keep getting promoted, and the Peter principle. Guy's last name was Peter, economist, said this is what happens eventually. Your promotions outstrip your capabilities, and that's when you hit the ceiling, and
Mm.
that's when you fail, and that's the Peter principle. Unfortunately, named Peter principle, but from the perspective of I think I've always had that self belief, because it's like laying the foundation of who you are. Well, I did this, so I can do that, and I'm not afraid to fail.
Mm.
As I said in video games, fail fast and fail cheap. In other words, make sure you understand when it's not working and you haven't thrown a lot of money or a lot of time at it, and move on to the next thing. Because if you're not failing, you're not trying. And so that I think that's always been a little bit of my secret sauce, if you will. And it builds on this. And you look back as you get into your 40s and 50s and 60s in your career, you look back, well, I did this, so I can certainly do that.
Mm.
And your personal body of work, as long as I tell my kids this, just pay attention in life. My kids go, you got a photographic memory. Really? I just pay attention. And the other thing I tell my kids is, look, 90% of life is showing up
Mm.
and being there and being predictable and not the guy that cancels at the last minute. And yeah, you don't want to go there, but you go there and you do it. And you do it because you want to be seen as consistent and predictable and reliable. Forget your skills. And people look at people like that and go, I can trust him or her.
Mm.
And so that is something, simple edicts and values that you take with you throughout your life.
There's a phrase that we use in our business when we're bringing people in or working with people. It's the give a shit factor. If people really give a shit, then they can be incredibly effective within your business, because there are so many people within life who are effectively stealing a living, and they'll go into a business, they'll coast, and they may well be very bright and capable, but they will coast. But there are some people in life that just want to continue to move on and strive and strive and strive and strive, and that comes across very clearly in your life and career. And I was nodding away. I kind of was dying to interrupt because human beings are so bloody selfish and they just want to talk about themselves. But you said about the 11 plus at the beginning. Maybe I'm being slightly disloyal to my county of Kent where I grew up, but we're way behind the rest of the UK because we still have grammar schools. We still have them in 2024. I passed 11 plus just like you, and when you said that, that hit me, and it's always been in my mind that if I didn't pass that 11 plus, I wouldn't have gone to that grammar school, I wouldn't have gone to university, and I wouldn't be talking to someone like you right now at this point. And I've got a huge amount of gratitude for what I've ended up having because of the chance of where I was born and where I've ended up and the people that supported me. But then a pretty, clear belief that I do give a shit and I am going to do well and I'm going to take every opportunity. So, I mean, let's talk about you because we talk about your life here. So I've kind of selfishly hijacked it for a minute to talk about myself. But that trajectory when you got to the States is quite extraordinary
Yeah.
because you mentioned 1981 is when you got there. You went to work for Patrick. By 1996, you're at Reebok as the head of global sports marketing. So that is a period of 15 years. You've gone from the Scouse with a patter selling sneakers, Patrick sneakers, to a guy that's agreeing a deal on behalf of Reebok to be the manufacturer of the kits at Liverpool. I mean, that 15 years that's for me, that's the crucial point. That's the point where you go from being, and you always kind of humbly call yourself the PE teacher, but you've gone from being
Yeah.
the PE teacher to the head of global sports marketing that's making the kits of the club that you love.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick taught me so much, and everybody should have a job like this. And I go back and I relate, and I've just finished my autobiography, and I relate to my summer jobs that I was lucky to get because my dad ran a pub, and everybody came into the pub, and my dad would say, "Give my lad a job for the summer." And I worked on construction sites. I worked on the M53 motorway. I drove a water bowser, that keep the heat, the dust down, so the guys from McAlpines could chomp their way through the Wirral and build the M53. I mean, I did everything. And it taught me so many lessons in those days. And so, not the least of which is hard physical work, which a lot of people don't go. I mean, brutal night shifts working in brick factories just outside of Wrexham, and I can feel the heat from the kiln to this day of lifting the bricks and putting them on pallets. I was very fortunate, Patrick, to become the national sales manager, and I got what's known as battlefield promotions as the people ahead of me, to your point, found out, right? And it's like, okay, I know what to do here. And you also embrace what's known as the cult of personality, which I recognize that has benefited me in my life a little bit, about not being afraid to put myself out there and to be outspoken and to give my opinion and to do stupid things on stage, particularly in the world of video games. And I think that people will rally towards people who don't hide, don't steal a living, don't just show up and check a box every day at work and disappear at 5 o'clock. That do give a shit. And you know, in our days at Reebok, we used to say GSD, get shit done. I mean, that was, you know, don't leave here because we were in the sneaker wars against Nike. And in those days, it sounds ridiculous when people listen to this now. We were neck and neck with Nike. And fortunately, they tore ahead while I was there. But it very much is focused on just believing in yourself, having people that believe in you. And I look back as I've written my autobiography, and there's so many people that I thank along the way that I realize believed in me, gave me a little bit of a heads up, gave me a reference, gave me some advice, made an introduction for me because you don't do this on your own. You really don't. And yeah, and I was recognized. I became chairman of the Soccer Industry Council of America in kind of 1989, 1990, if I recall. And that was the industry group that was trying to promote the game in this country and promote participation. We still didn't have a professional league. MLS hadn't come along there. And got very involved in building participation and speaking positively about the game in relation to the indigenous American sports, which never gave the cardiovascular benefits and the team building benefits that the beautiful game does. It's all changed now. People recognize that very much in this country. But yeah, and then Reebok got again, Roberto Mueller, the founder of Pony Shoes, saw me and one day and needed a director of soccer in 1992 and picked on me. And my family and I picked up from San Francisco and moved to Boston. You know, you take a risk. I've been at Patrick then 11 years and quit that was president of Patrick. But then went down to be director of soccer. So bigger company. I'm president of one company. I go back down to directorial level because I'm very confident I can work my way back up that ladder. Give me the opportunity in a few years under my belt there. And I was able, to your point, fortunately to do that. I became vice president of global sports and then senior vice president global marketing. And at that point thought, I'm about to get closer to Liverpool Football Club than I ever will in my life by sitting at the table with Peter Robinson, who 20 years later I would succeed, and Sammy Lee and Ronnie Moran and those guys as we launched the Reebok kit, which was a very seminal moment in kits. And again, sound nerdy here, but the color ecru came into play and come in, and people still nod and go, "Yeah, I remember that one with a cream color." You can see Robbie Fowler in it right now and Patrick Berger in it right now. And we took the sleepy, you buy a kit maybe for your kid, and started building a leisure wear platform for Liverpool Football Club. And it really started to explode over the coming years and took the Liverpudlian sense of humor as well as part of our advertising campaign. So yeah, I was very fortunate. And it's important to note that again, yes, that's where I ended up, but only because a lot of people put me on their shoulders and believed in me.
But where you take us there in that little explanation there, Peter, you take us from those kind of hot kilns, those working late at night from Wrexham right through to a Reebok head of global sports marketing. And it's something Fraser talks about of the generation that he has been as a football player. It's kind of one of the last generations where you talk a lot, Fraser, about jobs as a kid at Brentford, where you did your scholarship, and how that has helped you to have a certain drive, both on the pitch and now after playing as well. And it's that description of, you know, how hard you had to work as a young kid. And I was recognizing some of the jobs that I did when you were talking through. And again, I'm kind of taking it back to me time and time again, but you talked about working late shifts, you know, kind of, I worked for Birmingham City Council watering their plants at 2 or 3 in the morning in their city centre. Now, when I turned up at Schillings, the law firm that I arrived at the age of 23, and within the first week or two, I met Naomi Campbell, which was just absolutely blew my mind. Where the hell is this 23-year-old kid from Kent? What the hell is he doing here? But the drive that had given me in having to, you know, had to talk to drunks while I'm watering plants in Birmingham City Centre was massive for me. It's like, I'm here now. You just got to go and you got to crack and you do it. And Fraser, I know it's something you kind of worry a little bit that lads that are doing the scholarship that you were doing 15 years ago now, or how long ago it was now, are not getting that kind of really, really hard working scholarship, which doesn't actually set them up as well as maybe it should do.
Yeah, I think it's just it grounds you, doesn't it? I think that's the main thing. It grounds you, but it also, I think when you're in it, you're thinking, this is not what I want to. This is not what I want to be doing. And I think that
Yeah.
feeling there and experiencing that, I think there's a thinking about that's not really what I want to do, and then there's actually doing it, and you think this is really not what I want to do. And I remember like loading everyone in my family worked for my like family business doing floor laying, and I remember doing that a little bit as like a 14-year-old, straight away thinking this is not what I want to be doing. And it wasn't until I experienced that I was thinking, right, I need to. It does. I was like, I need to do more. There's more I can be doing here. And the football scholarships then were, yeah, our manager used to bring his dog in, and you'd be clearing up his dog poo, you'd be washing the toilets, you'd be scrubbing the floors, you'd be preparing the kits and stuff like that. But the one feeling I remember, because I loved those couple of years as well, but the one feeling you would have was imagine how good this will be without these jobs. So just having the life of a footballer. And that's what I think some clubs are trying to almost bring it back because there is real value in it. But it does. It's that humility and that experience of grounding. And those years that you talk about as well. I grew up. I was born in 1990, so my like initial years of watching the Premier League are of Liverpool in that Reebok kit, and even like Patrick. I remember Patrick were Wigan sponsors, and I remember Patrick football boots in JJB. Pony were
Yeah.
Tottenham sponsors at the time. So it does. It
Yeah.
was. I'm a like a real football kit nerd as well. I used to love football kits, but they bring back real vivid memories. And again, like you were saying about people with dementia or people that have forgotten certain things. I've forgotten a lot that happened then. But for some reason, football, you can remember real vivid games, players, kits, boots, the rest of it. So it takes me back as well.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, my wife, American, I'm on a Facebook page, football in the 70s, and I can see a photograph. I see a photo, black and white, like five players, Spurs versus Arsenal, type thing. I'll go, Jimmy Greaves, Martin Shivers. That looks like that's Bob Wilson in goal. I mean, and my wife goes, 50 years ago. I said, these people are seared into your
Mm,
memory, and particularly in that period there, because we didn't have it on television. Everything was absorbed, maybe match of the day, and then a game on ITV the next day. But everything was absorbed through photographs and Shoot magazine, 442, whatever it happened to be in those days. And I think that's a deeper tearing into your brain, into your memory of
mm,
all of that. And you're right on the apprenticeships. Phil Thompson and Rushy, good friends of mine, talk. They talk a lot about their apprenticeship days. I mean, it was like in Phil's case, obviously cleaning the boots, which was the ritual that we all know about, but then sweeping the cop. These were, and it was done exactly as what we're talking about, is to ground you, to
mm,
get you ready. And I think Matt, you know this, Alex Inglethorpe at the academy now, that there's a program where the academy players aren't allowed a certain car to buy at a certain level. And it's a very disciplined situation there that they don't get ahead of themselves so quickly. And you saw that when that money comes to a teenager so quickly, there's got to be somebody you hope that is saying, put it in the bank, don't be conspicuous consumption. Don't get out there in the Lamborghini or whatever the heck, because even though you can afford it, it's not a good look. And I'm glad certainly Liverpool does that. To the point you were making as well is I know that Liverpool has this memory program where they use footage of old games for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's part of the Liverpool Foundation that is a memory program that, as we all know, and as I just said, I can look at photographs from 50 years ago
mm.
and name every player that prompts things, that stimulates the brain. And when you find something like football that does that, you hope that there is kind of a ambient effect that it's helping you as somebody that's maybe suffering with dementia or Alzheimer's, still maintain some level of um, living quality of life of memory, and football being the stimulus for that is wonderful.
Wow.
The examples that you both used, you were talking about looking at those pictures from the 70s or whatever else, Peter, and they would be moments during your formative years when you were a young man. Fraser, talking about those early times in the 90s. I remember there was a podcast called Quickly Kevin, which was a comedy podcast, but it was about 1990s football. And I used to like to listen to that a lot. When I'm a man in my 40s, got lots of responsibilities, lots going on, I listen to that podcast and I'm taken back to being a teenage boy all over again. That brings you back to those wonderful memories, which is me. I think I'm being quite clever here to segue into the next stage of your career, because I sit with my son who's 12 and I could tell you, the Liverpool team from the 90s or the Man United team from the 90s and Gillingham teams from times past. And then I'll sit and watch football with my 12-year-old boy and he'll know all of the modern players. And that's partly because of football, but a big part of it is because of computer gaming, which is a world you knew
Right.
nothing about and now you know lots about. And I think of so you spent time at this is really your formative years, Fraser. Although I know you're working hard in your burgeoning football career, but you were at Sega, then you headed up Xbox for Microsoft, and then you were at EA Sports. And I won't even try to do the in the game bit after that. But all of those brands sit within the things that really influence, particularly young men, but also young girls as well. They really, really influence those formative years. But so 2000s when you started at Sega, um, I guess the answer must be yes. Did you have a real impression of how it's not computers, or it would be, gaming was about to take the world over?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's important to take you through what happened there. I'm at Reebok. Um, Things are struggling there. Nike's on a massive tear. We are really struggling as a company. I got a call from an executive recruiter in the winter of 1998, and I remember the guy's name was Rick Edwards, and said, where are you in your career? As executive recruiters do, headhunters do. And I go, well, tough out here in Boston right now. What do you know about video games? I said, absolutely nothing. And in those days, it's important to note that the demographic of a young teenage boy, uh, the Venn diagram of video games and sneakers was huge, a huge overlap. Different now. I mean, the industry has changed enormously. But the idea was, if I could sell sneakers to teenage boys, I could certainly figure out how to sell video games to teenage boys. And what really intrigued me was when I did, I got a little bit of a briefing document that the Dreamcast, the Sega Dreamcast, was going to be launched. It was going to be the first online console, first first non-computer to go online. And I thought, if this all works out, this thing called the internet, and this is still the dial-up days,
Yeah.
this could be huge. And so I took the risk. I flew out to San Francisco very quietly, didn't tell Reebok, and had an interview with my soon-to-be boss, who I then replaced 6 months later. Um, I got offered the job. I needed to go to Tokyo very quickly to sit in front of the Japanese executives, which again, you remember these moments in time. I'm there, I'm looking at them, they're all staring at me. I didn't know who they were. Got to know them all in subsequent years, for better or worse. And they said, "Tell me about yourself." And I said, "Well, blah blah blah. I'm born and bred in Liverpool." Well, as I said, Liverpool, a woman in the next table in the restaurant turned around and looked at me and smiled. It was Yoko Ono, and she looked
What?
away again. She she heard Liverpool. She turned around, looked at me, smiled, and went back again. And that was the only interaction we had. But those are the moments I just remember her being in that restaurant, and I got the job, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a risk, but the risk was staying at Reebok as it was really starting to die. And so these are the things in your career you go, it's time. And there's a lot of places. And look, I think that I look back, if somebody hadn't offered me a job, I was so loyal to that brand, and I loved the brand, and I loved the fight of being a challenger brand. I might still be there now. Yeah, and it's gone through so many iterations, but sometimes it takes somebody to throw something in front of you and offer you an opportunity, that you and make you make a decision, that gets you out of there, if you will. And that was probably the most impactful phone call of my life, other than the one that said, "Would you ever come to America?" from my college professor who had moved to Long Beach when I was still teaching physical education at Llangollen in North Wales. So you think about those moments, and yeah, and as I say, first few months I'm going, I have no idea what this is all about. I wasn't technical per se, but like any good Scouser, I figured out how to fake it till I made it and learned buzzwords, learned the vernacular, understood who the players were, and pieced together, um, my brand, if you will, as somebody coming in that was very quickly the face of Sega, and then getting an understanding piecemeal of the industry until I could really absorb it and have real substance in that understanding rather than just this superficialness of the first few months where I learned to say things not really understanding what they meant. And then after a while, I got it all figured out.
Well, look, yeah, not only do you have the spirit of John Lennon backing you on this one, you had that within you that I've written the word playfulness here, and I think it's a really important thing. Something Fraser and I talk a lot about. From my point of view, life's too serious to take it seriously. And this tracks through all of your time in tech and in gaming. I've written down a few things. Obviously, these are things you've spoken about plenty of times before. You were a zombie in the House of Dead, so you appeared as an extra in the background for that. There's a great video of you playing Rock Band, playing the Hives. I think it's Main Offender by the Hives. You managed to pause it mid-song, but you did a pretty.
Yeah.
I actually watched the whole 3.5 minutes. I quite enjoyed it, Peter. I thought you did a good job, to be fair. I didn't like it so much when you were singing along. There was a professional singer alongside you. You should have left that to her. There was a couple of tattoos that you got for Halo and GTA. Well, I'm not convinced that they're permanent. I certainly can't see them on your arms at the moment, but it all comes together as those lovely little moments. That's why I'd written that quote down, which I probably used too early in our chat. Never been afraid to make a fool of myself, and I don't think you do make a fool of yourself. But what you do, you also said early on in this pod, not afraid to fail. Go and have some bloody fun. What is the worst that can happen? And that has stood you in really, really good stead.
Yeah, I mean, I took the lessons you take, and you have to take these, even if it's a different industry. I was in the sneaker wars. I was in this high stakes, multi tens of billions of dollars, as it turned out, war, which we couldn't keep up with at Reebok. But I was a challenger brand and loved the like upstart mentality. And I would go into sales presentations a little bit and take some digs at Nike and what have you. In video games, that was a wonderful platform to do exactly that. So we encouraged the console wars. I certainly did, in which it was at first Sega versus PlayStation. And we did all kinds of crazy stuff. We ambushed golf tournaments for the Sony executives and got a guy in a Sonic the Hedgehog suit to run through. And we changed out all the golf balls overnight with Sega logos. And then we ran an airplane over Sega Dreamcast coming on 99.99. This was the stuff you could do. And more importantly, this is what the gamer, the consumer, the customer wanted to believe was going on with this massive fight for supremacy. And that's exactly what it was. But you had no disrespect to the people in the industry. They're technical people. They're a little nerdy. And I am neither of those. And so I could be the guy on stage doing all the stuff you said, the tattoos, the taking digs, because I love being the challenger brand and taking digs at Sony. And the consumers lapped it up and the industry grew accordingly. And our job, yes, I was on stage with Rock Band in Santa Monica, and long story, I hadn't figured out the latency and the lag on the guitar, looking at the screen, 500,000 people watching on television. And I paused the game because I hit the button in the wrong place. Never afraid of that. But people still talk about that, as you've seen, to this day. So it's these things that these moments in time that start to elevate the industry. And then we would go, and a lot of this was at E3, the huge video game conference in Los Angeles, that we as an industry, and in those days it was called the IDSA, the Interactive Digital Software Association. And our job, even though we were at war with each other, we would then get in the same room and saying, all right, what can we do to elevate, being the theory of a rising tide, lifts all ships. And we had this little bit of inferiority complex against movies and TV and music. And very quickly over the years, certainly that I was at Xbox, and then definitely when I was at EA, video games became dominant at any metric
Mm.
you wanted versus any other entertainment medium. And the Sega Dreamcast is a good example. I figured out that when we were launching the Dreamcast on 9/9/99, that I already could figure out from the forecasting numbers, this would be the biggest retail entertainment launch in history in the United States. And so we pushed that out, that we're going to be bigger than Star Wars. Nothing was going to be as big as this. And what that did is took us from kind of a myopic industry perspective to the front pages of newspapers and the lead stories on CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS, and break the shackles of your parents looking down at this, and particularly in the UK, the tabloids blaming video games for any time something horrific had happened with weaponry or whatever. I always remember the Scum newspaper, calling Call of Duty killer, linking somebody that had unfortunately killed somebody to the fact that they played Call of Duty, and this ridiculous linkage. If you play a video game where there's shooting going on, therefore you're more likely to shoot somebody in real life. Obviously, research just scoffs at that, but this was what we as an industry needed to do, was get respectability. And now I think the end of this year, 2024, video games will be a $200 billion industry on a global basis.
Wow, that was my first console as like a might have been an 8 or 9 year old was a Sega Saturn. I was the
Oh yeah.
first one I had, and then it reminds me of anytime I think of Dreamcast, I automatically go to the Arsenal
Arsenal.
kit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably 97, something like that maybe. Um,
It was 99, 2000, 99,
Ah, yeah,
2000.
yeah. It was like Thierry, yeah, big like Thierry Henry and those kind of years. But that again that links it that brand to like for me Sega is like Sonic Arsenal kit. But Matt talks about the playful element of that and having fun with it as well. Is that again something that you've always had where you don't really care about what other people are gonna think when you're on stage? Or is that something you seem to develop with experience and time?
I think it goes back to the conversation of being a Scouser. I'm not sure we really worry about what people think. If I think back to and I still somehow have my school reports from Grove Park from 1966, 67. Apparently I was the class clown, and I think some of that a little bit, excuse me, my nickname was Scouse because in those days people didn't move around. I was the
Mm.
first Liverpudlian a lot of these people had ever come across. So I instantly, and to this day, if I bump into somebody in Wrexham that remembers me from those days, I go watch Wrexham. Um, but I Scouse. Nobody's called me that in 50 odd years. And they certainly don't sound like a Scouser anymore. But I think that in answer to your question, Fraser, I take that from the genetic coding that Liverpudlians have,
Mm.
is that, outspoken, cocky. I don't want to say arrogant, but yeah. And do we give a shit what people think? No. And it comes this weird, People's Republic of Liverpool, Scouse Republic, the unfortunate Scouse not English, which I don't really subscribe to, all of that is this concept of circling the wagons around each other, particularly in tough periods, because London didn't care about us. Maggie Thatcher didn't care about us. Geoffrey Howe didn't care about us. In fact, suggested that Liverpool be put into managed decline, from a UK government investment perspective. And ironically, the only people that seemed to care about us in more recent times was Brussels and the European Union, which made us European Capital of Culture in 2008 and put a ton of money into the city to rebuild and help celebrate the amazing history Liverpool has, as a port and the historical elements in there. So, I think I've always had that playfulness. I think it's a little bit of a defensive thing as well when you psychoanalyze yourself, that you go, okay, class clowns are usually like they're a little insecure. I'm not sure I'm insecure anymore, but there was that element of insecurity that I think people then over index towards being outspoken and playful. And I embraced, I talked a lot to gamers in the early days, focus groups and talking to gamers and whatever. And I could get a sense for what they were looking for. They didn't need a guy on a stage in a suit and tie telling them what the memory and the frames per second speed and all this. They needed guys, rolling up the sleeves and showing Grand Theft Auto tattoos, dragging Bill Gates on stage with them as well to do similar things, and taking shots at the other guy. And that was the key. And gamers loved it. And they bought more games. And they were in line for the next console. And this rising tide was lifting all ships. Nintendo, Sega, Sony, Xbox, all of the publishers, Activision, EA, I mean, the entire industry at the same time, faster broadband and then faster broadband speeds, bigger hard drive capabilities, and then the graphics improved. And all of a sudden you could do games like Grand Theft Auto. And there's this suspension of reality that you get that you couldn't get in the old days of 2D side scrollers like Sonic. And all of a sudden you've got games that felt like you were playing a movie. And all of a sudden the 16-year-old who would typically give up gaming and in the old days and go to something else was playing games at 17, 18, 19, 20. They're getting married and they're still playing games. And then they're having a son and they're playing games with the son. And then games like we alluded to, FIFA come along and the perfect father-son game.
Well, let's have a quick chat about FIFA. I say this with a real vested interest that I totally understand why my son is obsessed with it. I wish he wasn't as obsessed with it as he is. But I do totally get it because I can imagine being 12 and I can't imagine how much my mind would be blown by it. But the first thing I want to say about FIFA is it goes back to what you said about that kind of scouse mentality of just putting yourself out there, not giving a shit. Was it your decision to put Jordan Henderson on the front of the game? Now, I say that as a huge Jordan Henderson fan, largely as a human being. I found myself being very sad about his Saudi move and the stick that he got, but maybe his decision to go as well. But other than that, isn't it a shame that I mentioned that? That's kind of blot on his copybook. But he is a great young man, and he led Liverpool later on under your tenure to the Champions League.
Did I lead my team and suggest very strongly that somebody with the qualities of Jordan Henderson and also the power of Liverpool Football Club being on the coach? These were the days when it was, I think we were evolving from Wayne Rooney plus somebody, and then we were getting more into what we call regional covers. The game was exploding. So instead of just having one cover, Rooney at one point, Messi later on, you go, we can, and the regions were saying that EA Germany saying we don't want Wayne Rooney on the cover, we want whomever at that time, and we then could get into the logistics of actually developing different cover players, different cover athletes, some of whom we would link with Messi because Messi played across all regions. But in some instances, and this was, I think, 2016, if I remember, we're looking at this. And I said, look, we've got to look at clubs now, not just players. We've got to look at who are the rising clubs. And this is a time that Brendan Rodgers era that, I think just prior to Jurgen coming in. Where do we get the most bang for our buck? And you also look at an upstanding individual like Jordan Henderson. So, yeah, I may have guided my team to that. And I may have led on social media the campaign for Jordan. I've got to go look at my tweets, I guess. Pushed hard for Jordan on the cover. And, it's something. And I think during that time, and I agree with you, that even the most rabid non-Liverpool fan could respect Jordan Henderson for who he was. So it was somewhat of an uncontroversial choice. I got to tell you, there were hours of meetings trying to figure out who we put on there, less about who is going to enjoy it and more about who's going to get pissed off because that particular player is on the cover. So these were the decisions we were making during this period of time. I think at its peak, we had 18 different cover combinations around the world just to make sure that we were tapping in to local tribal rivalries.
Yeah. And of course, on social media, nothing does better than controversy. So I don't think it probably harmed the brand that people were talking about it. And it was only a year later where I think you probably at that stage would have thought, well, I've probably got as close to my beloved Liverpool Football Club I'll ever get to, and then an opportunity arose in 2017. Um, how much of a wrench was it to come and do that job? Because I asked that knowing that you were a family man in California at that stage. So actually giving everything up and going over to Liverpool was not as simple as you're following your love. But I guess it was just an opportunity. It was too good not to follow up.
Yeah, and in retrospect, it was tough. I think back on these days. I got a call in what turned out to be the summer of 2016. I'm chief operating officer at EA. We're flying. I have a lot of money ahead of me, and the way it works in places like Silicon Valley for publicly traded companies is executives are given equity, to stay. It's what's known as vesting,
Yeah.
and so I could see many millions of dollars in front of me for just staying alive and being there and showing up for work every day. But I got a call from an executive recruiter, Spencer Stewart in London, and they say, "Would you ever consider leaving the US and returning to the UK?" And I tell this story the same way, but I looked out the window as I'm doing right now at the sunshine. I go, yeah, no. I couldn't. I'm in my 10th year at EA. I'm the chief operating officer. We had navigated this very difficult transition from selling discs to delivering games to gamers' hard drives all around the world. And the company was flying. But then the next sentence was, but what if it was to be CEO of Liverpool Football Club? And hmm, um, and it was one of those. I mean, it took me back a number of years where I had a soft outreach in 2010 when FSG or New England Sports Ventures, as they originally were, bought the club. And I got outreach from recruiter then. Would you be interested in coming back? It was too soon, and I was too loyal at that time to my boss John Riccatello, who had hired me and believed in me and set me up as president of EA Sports. And so I said, yeah, no, and Ian Ayre is our chief commercial officer, and I knew Ian because we were already at EA making contact with clubs. I said Ian would be perfect for this, and so I gave my blessing. Not that I don't think my word meant anything, that they had then selected Ian, and Ian went on for 10 years, as you know, and became my predecessor. But I talked to, I was going through a divorce at the same time as well, so it was challenging. And
How old were
I
your
was
kids at the
then,
time?
my kids were already well into their 30s,
Yeah.
and so, but it was more complex than that. I had a new partner, now my wife. She has two boys, but we have six kids between us. So it was that, but my kids were, well, they had their own careers going already. It wasn't like I'm leaving 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. So I'm leaving 30-year-olds and who are already well set professionally and well established. And unfortunately, I couldn't even tell them until the shoe dropped. So long story, Mike Gordon and I go back into we're talking about how it's going to work. Lengthy conversation about the pros and cons of being from Liverpool and being a fan, and is that a plus or a minus? How do you segregate the two? And I was different than Ian. And coming in, I've never been in football. I mean, I love the game and I love Liverpool and I follow the game, and my linkage to football probably was the game known as FIFA then, and everything that I've done in my life regarding football. But have I ever run a football club? No. Have I been back in England for 40 years? No, full time. But in the end, come I think late 2016, met Mike in Chicago O'Hare Airport in a clandestine meeting, and we agreed and shook hands and had to keep our lid on it because Ian was, if you recall, Matt was playing out his 1 year. He'd given his resignation, said, "This is my last season." He was still in place, and the agreement was we were going to announce in April, and I'd be there shortly thereafter, and have a couple of weeks with Ian still in place to do a little bit of a transition. Well, Unfortunately, on February the 27th, Mike Gordon calls me and says, "Hey, we got a problem here. The Scum newspaper has figured out that you're the guy. Don't know where that came from, and they're going to announce at 2 o'clock this afternoon,
Yeah.
your time." And we've been asked for comment. Um, can we confirm or deny? And the biggest issue is I was what's known as the Section 16 officer of a publicly traded company. My departure would be deemed by the SEC as material to the company, and that information needs to be known immediately to all shareholders. Excuse me. So we agreed, all right, I have no choice. We're going to have to confirm at the end of the day. You're going to let me talk to my boss. I have to let the company know what's going on. And this thing needs to happen today. It's just unfortunate, but if they're going to release it, we can't lie. And that because if I'd been unemployed, it might have been a different story. But because I'm working for a company that's traded on the Nasdaq, that was an issue. So, well, my boss Andrew, who used to work for me and eventually became the CEO, great story, and Aussie Chelsea fan, and I said, "Mate, I need to talk to you." This was at 8 a.m. And he said, "Well, I'm at breakfast, with business breakfast. I'll be in the office in a bit." He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I need to let you know I'm leaving EA." And then there's this pause for a good 5 seconds. And he goes, "Where are you going? Are you going to Activision? You're going back up to Xbox?" I said, "Now I'm going to be the CEO of Liverpool Football Club." And then there's this pause again, and his voice cracks. And I always remember this. He said, "Mate, I couldn't be happier for you."
Oh.
I always remember those words, So it was that, and then he wrote. We had to do an announcement. Wrote a brilliant announcement, which I still have somewhere. But that was a frenzied day. I had to tell my kids because we kept everything so tightly under wraps. So I'm making phone calls to my kids, adult kids, saying, "You're going to see something in the next 2 hours. I want you to let know what's going on. That I'm heading back to England, and this is what I'm going to do." So yeah, that was that day. I always remember February 27th, and of all despicable rags, no surprise
Well, I was going to
that was
say
the one.
it's kind of apt, isn't it? And my entire career has been dealing with that newspaper and other newspapers and all that kind of stuff. And they for all that they are, and I share certain views that you have. They're very good, unfortunately, at getting information, and therefore they force people's hands. They change people's lives in ways that are extraordinary. And for you to start that job and to be that newspaper that do that was quite extraordinary. And then what was extraordinary was the 3 years you had there. To win the Champions League was incredible. But I think you've said this before, and it must be right. It's one thing to win the Champions League, but of course that football club has got a record in the Champions League. But it was to win that Premier League title, having won Division One after Division One after Division One during the glory years, which would have been when I was at primary school and before Fraser was born. But not to win the Premier League since it started in 1992. But the real sadness was it was won behind closed doors. And I can't remember whether I saw this, but I think it was you, Sir Kenny Dalglish, and you keep calling him Rushy, but Ian Rush in that stadium together. That would have been the moment where you thought of your dad, you pinched yourself, you wondered how the hell did the PE teacher from Wrexham get here?
Yeah, I mean, I got the picture. I'll never forget it. We snuck champagne into the bowl, as it's known. You're not supposed to have alcohol in the bowl. It's just me, Kenny, Rushy. Kenny had just presented Jordan with the trophy, came back, and there's nobody there. And I got a great photo. And yeah, it's one of those pinch me moments. By then, I spent a lot of time with Kenny and Ian Rushy, and so it was no big deal to me. And they're great friends. And I saw Kenny last weekend at the Clatterbridge event, and Marina and the kids, and so they're great friends. But it was one of those moments. And in fact, I also for the Champions League bus parade, which somehow I ended up on the bus. Another pinch me moment there with the players. I have a picture of my dad that I have my assistant Tina, who you might remember, Matt, just take a picture, and Dad, we're on the bus. He's been gone 20 odd years. And I have a picture of him on my phone, and Tina takes a picture of me. So my dad was with me bizarrely as we're driving down South Liverpool in Allerton, where I literally went to school 60 years earlier. I mean, I realized, wait, that's Springwood School. I'm driving past the school that I went to when I was 6 years of age, and still there, Springwood Heath. And so, but and my dad's photographs are a great picture of that. And it's always important, again, don't get lost in that moment. You've got to just take a moment and say, okay,
Yeah.
uh, Dad, you got me here. Dad, you took me in 1959. Dad, I can't believe here I am. Virgil's here, Robbo's there, Millie's there, the Ox is there. Somehow I'm in the middle of this. And slightly, again, imposter syndrome kicks in. It's like, what the hell am I doing here? Um, Rather awkwardly, but, looking down as I did for 4 hours at those people's faces and driving through some of the most impoverished postcodes in the United Kingdom. But the joy on those people's faces when one of the players would show them the cup, and this affinity to something bigger than themselves, that they could feel good about their life and feel proud about. Those are moments, and those are faces that I will never forget.
There's something, and I alluded to it before. I joke. I'm very proud to support the football club I do. It makes me slightly different to most people supporting a small club like Gillingham. But there's something about Liverpool Football Club that creates incredible moments, that has such emotion. And I'm being quite self-indulgent in this podcast, Peter. I'll keep hijacking it. But you mentioned Kenny and Marina. Very sadly, I lost my best friend from university. We lost him to pancreatic cancer at the age of 36. But one of the last things that I did with Dave was I took him to Anfield as a guest of the directors. We were there. Kenny's guest that day was Alan Hansen and his lovely wife. And the way they fussed over Dave, who was visibly very ill, Marina went and got him a Liverpool coat because she was worried he was going to be cold out there because he was very, very slim and skinny. And then after the game, the Ray Hoffman, who you will know as the head of player care, came up and said, is Dave ready? I said, what do you mean is Dave ready? He said, he's going to come down and meet the boys. They'd actually just lost to Chelsea, but I remember a young 19-year-old Raheem Sterling spending time with Dave. Stephen Gerrard came over. The boys were absolutely fantastic. And well, one of the next times I went to Anfield was after Dave had gone. And I cried and cried and cried during You'll Never Walk Alone. It was really evocative. And I say that as a non-Liverpool fan. I'm indifferent to their results. I really am, because I do lots of work with lots of Premier League football clubs. But there's something about that football club. There's something about You'll Never Walk Alone. And when Sir Kenny became Sir Kenny, I don't post personal stuff on social media that much. But there's one thing I did. I posted a picture of us at Anfield, of Kenny with Dave. And that was really, really special for me. So it is a really, really special football club. So before I upset myself, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to post Liverpool now, and I'm conscious of time, and you've been so generous with your time as well. But there are a couple of other things I wanted to talk about, and talk about the heart going. There we go. I'm trying to be smooth with this. It's something we talked before this call started, and obviously it's something Fraser and I talk a lot about with his heart condition. And it was something I caught in the news. I think your name popped up earlier on this year. And it brings together heart health and tech. And tech's obviously something you've worked in for a long, long time. Well, I'll let you tell the story. It's your story, but your Apple Watch saved your life is probably the headline.
Yeah, very much so. July 12th, so 3-4 months ago, whatever that is. My eldest daughter's flying in, Tara, 41 years of age, works for EA. She's flying in. I was going to pick her up from Santa Barbara Airport here. And I was just doing some stuff around the house here, and felt just a little lightheaded, just a little bit like, yeah, not quite right this morning. And we have a driveway that's got a bit of a climb, and went down, did some stuff down there, walked back up again. And I was out of breath. And it's unusual. Look, I'm still a bit of a runner, certainly on the Peloton.
You look in great shape.
I was going to say,
I'm in every day. It's the roots of being a PE teacher, right? Just who I and very fortunate. I can get on my bike here in Santa Barbara and bicycle to the YMCA. Great program there, and bike back, and the weather's always perfect. So why wouldn't you? And so, and then I drive to the airport, and my Apple Watch starts pinging me, and it's saying low heart rate, low heart rate. I'd never seen that before. And my wife used to work for Fitbit, and she's a yoga teacher and blah, blah. So I was like, I took a screenshot. I said, what do you think this is? She says, don't move. And she jumps in. She's somewhere in Santa Barbara, comes, grabs me from the airport where I'm in my daughter's car. I message my daughter, say, your car's here, keys under the tire or whatever. I got to go to the hospital, apparently. And I'm walking around. Debbie, my wife, picks me up, zoom to the hospital, and it's still pinging me. It says 32 beats per minute. And I'd never seen this before. And so I walk in. Great thing, God bless the NHS, but you pay handsomely for great healthcare here, and this is what you get. So triage nurse meets me at the front door, goes, let me take your pulse, sit down, radios a code, and she says, she comes, gets a wheelchair, and rolls me into an exam room where there's a crash team waiting for me, like literally rip off my shirt, put these two pads for defibrillator, stick IV in me, and then hit me with the sensors for the EKG. And then I'm going, the hell? And on the monitor, already on the EKG, I see my heart rate's at 27. And the doctor, the emergency room doctor, I can see the printing, comes back in, and he needs to work on his bedside manner. But he goes, this is not good. This is not good. And he says, you need a pacemaker. And I literally went to Starbucks because I thought I'd get a non-fat latte because that'll fix my lightheadedness, to no more than 40 minutes later in the exam room needing a pacemaker. 2 hours later, I'm in the operating theater with the electrocardiologist and the cardiologist that appeared out of nowhere 10 minutes after I walk in. And I own a pacemaker in my heart. And I'm fascinated because you're actually awake when they're inserting it into your chest, and there's a little shield here. But I'm talking to the technician from Abbott Labs who makes this pacemaker, and he's saying, I'm pacing, I'm pacing, I'm pacing. And I said, what does that mean? He says, I'm in control of your heart. We're running the wire through your veins back in. We're going to attach the wire right now to your heart. And then the moment that wire is attached, I'm going to let the pacemaker take over. And gulp, a little bit of a like, here we go. And within 20 seconds, I felt better as my heart rate, he had calibrated my heart at 65 BPM. And I'm fascinated because I'm seeing the screens. By now, I'm a tech guy. And what am I looking at? And it's like, it says, there's your BPM. I'm trying to get your voltage right so that it's the minimal amount of voltage to power your heart every beat, because it's an always on pacemaker, so that your battery lasts for as long as possible. And so all of this was fascinating. But if I would have continued, I would have ignored it because I'm a stupid, bullheaded guy and would have thought, Buffy will fix this. And I said to the doctor, what would have happened? He said, you would have collapsed at the wheel. And that's what we see is worse than and you'd have been driving your daughter on the freeway, and God only knows what would have happened because you couldn't have continued at 27 BPM. And so I was in what's known as complete heart block, which is nothing to do with my plumbing. It's electrical. And the electrical system had just failed. And the backup had kicked in, but the backup only works for so long. So thank you, Apple.
Yeah.
And
also,
have you had to go on, Matt? Sorry.
No, Fraser, it's more important you talk on this, mate.
And have you had to adjust your life accordingly after this, or have you gone back to pretty much where you were before?
The latter, Fraser, back to where I was. For 2 weeks, I couldn't do this because they're worried your wires in your heart have to embed in the heart muscle. So I couldn't raise my arm above my shoulder because they're worried that the wires will pop out, which wouldn't be good. But now, I was in Las Vegas this weekend, and we're members of a gym there. I was in the gym, lifting on the treadmill, doing everything. Peloton we have at home here. Yeah, there's nothing I can't do. And the doctor says you'll forget you have a pacemaker. I don't forget because I can feel it right there, but it doesn't bother me anymore. The one thing I do is my wife's a yoga teacher as well. So the first time I went into hot yoga, I'm going, I need to keep an eye on my heart rate here at 100, 10 degrees and 50% humidity. So I will constantly be looking at my heart rate. on my watch, which is easy to do, and just maintaining and getting used to where it's at. Because you've got a piece of hardware that the software is keeping me alive,
Mm.
and I don't think twice about it. But I'm always fascinated to see if I can push it past the upper boundary, which he's got it set out, which is 140 BPM, and it's not easy to do no matter what
Yeah.
I do. The calibration of the software is set at 140 BPM.
Mm. Myself and Matt have different views on this, but I look at your life and there's so many different like sliding doors moments, and if this didn't happen, that wouldn't happen. And I'm a very spiritual person, and I imagine if your wife's a yoga teacher, she has a path of spirituality as
Oh,
well. Um,
absolutely.
do you have a faith or a belief in, how your path has come to be? Or like Matt is more, he does believe in coincidence.
Well, I'm working on
Where
the basis
I'm
that Peter's into tech and science and all that kind of
it's
stuff.
yeah,
So
there's that angle to
we
it
shall
also.
see.
My wife reminds me every day, Fraser, about it. So she'll quote yoga, and she's a
Mm,
fully qualified. So the spirituality, the secular spirituality of yoga and karma is a big deal to her. And karma comes out of that kind of Indian beliefs of you do bad things, shit'll catch up with you, right? And she has a great T-shirt she wears a lot. I saw that karma, right? So from that perspective, signed karma. Um, and we'll do things. I mean, she links the simplest things of life to good living, clean
mm.
living. If the traffic lights are all green for like five in a row, she said, that's good living right there. Or if we see a parking space outside of the restaurant right there, I know she'll say, that's a result of good living. I mean, so she links these simple things of life to
Mm.
having this authentic, transparent life. And we've both been through a lot. We're both divorced. And so we've been through difficult times
Mm.
psychologically and I guess spiritually. But yeah, I mean, and I do think certainly just that I started to wear an Apple Watch from a work perspective because it would ping me with my text messages and my WhatsApps and my emails. So I could look at them and then in my mind, I need to deal with that. I don't need to deal with that. And then I added functionality around the house. I can open the gate anywhere in the world at this house from my Apple Watch. And of course, I can speak to anybody, that calls me if I don't have my phone nearby. So the more you make it part of your life, the more and more. And the number of people I did television in Los Angeles on this because I have a lot of friends at Apple that have worked with me over the years and ended up at Apple. And they got to hear about it and they alerted the media, Apple Watch saves man's life, good headline. And the number of people have said, I've either bought one or I've taken it out of the drawer again, or my wife is badgering me. So I wear it throughout the day. It's the first thing I put on. Um, I'm a watch guy, so it's a little bit of a shame. I've accumulated watches over 30, 40 years. I love nice watches with a view that these will be handed to my son when I'm gone. So in the evening, maybe at dinner with my wife, I'll put on a nice watch, but this thing is always on,
Mm.
and I use it as a tool to enhance my life, make a lot of things easier. Which, if you figure out how to use it that way, it does. And I can strongly recommend whether it's an Apple Watch, whether it's a Fitbit, Samsung does watch, but having which 10 years ways about it. I because I that capability wasn't there. Pebble watches, if you remember those, then it was Fitbits and then it was Apple Watches. But my Apple Watch was insistent that I do something. My male brain just figured out a Starbucks was going to cure it, and it clearly wasn't.
Yeah. Um, with, as you were talking before, you said that I think it was something like, "There's nothing I can't do." Now, you meant that in as much as your pacemaker has not prevented you from doing stuff, but I think that's a quite nice thing to pick up. And I know that you're too humble to say this, but you seem to have that mindset of, "There's nothing I can't do," and the things that you've achieved have been fantastic. And I just want to finish up by talking about the future because you said right at the
Yeah.
beginning you're nearly 70, and I am. I'm very enthused by the fact that you are not slowing down. You've got quite a few years on me. I'm still only 45, and I keep telling Fraser 45 is young, and I want 45 to be young because I want 70 to be young. I want to keep going. I love doing what I do. I'm really lucky to work with people like Fraser, and I really enjoy my life, my professional life. So it's no surprise, therefore, that you're not just running a US soccer franchise that you hope to open in 2025. You're the owner of Santa Barbara
Yeah.
Sky FC. So tell us a little bit about that. We haven't even had time to talk about the fun you had with Wrexham and Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElwee, and to talk about jealousy as a Gillingham fan. If I'm jealous of Liverpool, I'm incredibly jealous of Wrexham, what they've achieved as well. But talk to us about Santa Barbara Sky FC. How much of that time is that taken up, and how ambitious are you to get to, I guess, the MLS?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're actually linked. Is come back here during COVID. My contract was up at Liverpool. We bought this house online, bizarrely,
Wow.
and Debbie on a plane during COVID. Just make sure what we just bought is A there, B is what it looks like in the photographs, and it was. Um, and then as soon as I got back, friend of mine out of New York that linked to Liverpool, Steve Horowitz out of Inner Circle, which is a company in New York City that puts football clubs and potential investors together. I'd known for many, many years. And he said, "Hey, Rob McElhenney wants to talk to you." And I go, "Okay." And he lives in LA. Next thing I know, like 2 days later, he's at my doorstep and spends 3 hours trying to convince me to go back, a few weeks after I just left, to go back and to be the CEO of Wrexham. And I said, "Look, Rob, I love the club. The great teams of the '70s, I could name them all. John Neal was the manager. We were we were pushing hard in the FA Cup every year, beating Arsenal.
Oh, I remember that
And
Mickey
it was a
Thomas goal, wasn't it?
Thomas free kick. I mean, all of that. And I played with Mickey and Joey Jones as a kid, and so we were both in the same Wrexham youth team in the mid '70s, and um, it wasn't going to happen. But Rob tweets this bizarre tweet: "Don't get in the plane until you know who the pilot is," with a picture of me and him. And then I have to explain to everybody, "Look, I'm not going back to Wrexham." So I became an advisor for Rob and Ryan and helped them enormously over 6 months. But that drew the attention of USL. And they go, "Wait, the former CEO of Liverpool is in Santa Barbara. We're on the next plane." And so they arrive. And I said infamously, they explained to me they've been trying to get a professional club built here because it's a very important market for their expansion to the West Coast. And they hadn't found anybody that could get it going. And you need somebody that like believes in it and gets it going. So I said, "Look, because I was working full time at Unity, I'm working on a whole separate thing, volumetric capture for sports broadcasting in real time 3D. Conversation for another podcast, but I said, I'll be an engaged minority owner. I'll help out and I'll put a few shillings in there to help get going. Well, 2 months later, I start looking at this. I go, I've just got to jump in. So then I'm going, all right, let's build the club. Literally, when I say a clean sheet of paper, literally, let's write some names down and figure out what we need to do here. Because I can't be an engaged minority owner if there's nobody actually doing anything. I said, I know how to do this. I think, again, going back to imposter syndrome and whatever. And I become the founding owner. I start writing the checks. I build the brand. I engage with mobile web companies. Get with USL, figure out we're going to play in USL League One, start negotiating with Santa Barbara City College on a stadium, hire people, on my dime that are going to build this thing out ready for play. Well, it has become a labor of love over a couple of years now, and I am now the founding owner. We're going to be playing next year, not at Santa Barbara City College, but the University of California, Santa Barbara has a 17,000 soccer specific stadium. It'll be the best stadium in the league, best weather in the league, most affluent market in the league, which is good news, bad news when you look at your operating expense of player salaries and housing. But Santa Barbara Sky Football Club, which I built with people around me again, and my wife running. Immediately, we've launched a 501c3, which is a tax deductible charity called Fundación Cielo in Spanish. It's Sky Foundation. We know the power of the club, and straight away we knew that we needed to give back to this community. So we built that as well, and we're ready to go. We'll start bringing players in at the end of the season when one of these guys are on 1 year contracts. So we're waiting for the season to end in a couple of weeks and we'll get going. But we start play at Carter Stadium at the University of California, Santa Barbara campus in USL in March of 2025.
Wow. Well, it's super exciting. We'll be looking at. We've got another team to start supporting, so we'll be looking out for that, Peter. I mean, as you said, that could be for another podcast. There's about 5 different podcasts we could do with your long life and your career and everything you love talking about. But thank you so much for the time you spent with us. We're sorry it wasn't face to face. We know you've actually still been feeling a little bit poorly, so we're really grateful for your time over Zoom. But Peter, thank you for being on Football Journeys.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Fraser. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Brilliant. That's it. We're done.
Amazing. Who's the kit manufacturer?
Puma.
Another
funny story. They're pretty good with USL. They've got a program where they know exactly what the clubs need, and they give you a discount on the extra merchandise for merchandise sales. So we looked at Puma. We took bids from Nike, Adi, and Puma. Puma had a great program. So our colors are unique. They're navy blue, and I don't know if you've seen the logo, but it's a very distinctive logo with Saint Barbara in there, and the terracotta is the color of the Spanish tiles on the roofs you see here in Santa Barbara, and the midnight blue is the sky we have. I'm looking out at the ocean now in the evenings because we're not a big city, and we don't have massive amounts of light pollution here, and the skies are stunning in the evening. So and so I said, all right, we're going to go with Puma. I get on a Zoom with Puma just to introduce myself. And the guy who's the head of Puma now in the United States is a guy called Rob Plunkett. And he goes, you might not remember me, but you gave me my first job when I came to Reebok in 1994, 30 years ago. And he's never forgotten me. When he said his name, I went, I think I remember him. He was a kid out of college. Now he's in his late 50s. And he's head of Puma. So it was, again, these little circle of lives of people that and again, I clearly said you took care of me, you helped me, you mentored me. So you meet a lot of people along the way, and you better take care of them because you've no idea who you're going to meet at the back end. So that's always something that
It's always been a life philosophy for me. You walk into a restaurant, the person that greets you, you ask them how they are when they ask you how you are. Those kind of elements of treating people with respect, no matter who you think they are. And there's a selfish reason for it, as you said. That guy, you treated him with respect when he was a youngster, and then he's treated you with respect when he's on his way up to the top. So it's a mark of the man you are, Peter. So look, thank you so much for all of your time on this. We think this is probably not coming out until January. We're launching the series just before Christmas, and then we're going to run it through January. So I'll drop you a note just before it comes out. We'll probably do a few little clips that we might use for social media. So we'll just keep you in the loop on that.
Yeah, and if you need, I've done a couple of these where they've looked for a photo, but you're a social media maven, Matt, so you can find a lot of stuff that even though when I first met you, you censored so much of my shit on Facebook and Instagram and whatever the hell, particularly Twitter, which is a very important part of a chapter in my autobiography, the controversy of me and Twitter and Liverpool Football Club. They never liked it. Oh yeah, never liked me engaging with the fans. Yeah, it was. Like Gordon called it unstatesmanlike. Unstatesmanlike. That was one of our biggest challenges as I was leaving, is that I believed my role was to engage with fans, and they were.
I wonder whether they misunderstood who you were, if that was the case, because obviously I've done that in preparing for this. You put yourself out there. I'll go back to that quote, never been afraid to make a fool of myself. I don't take that as a negative, by the way. I repeat it because that's who you are.
No, look, when I go last week, when I go back to Liverpool and people remember me and recognize me, guy takes me to Lime Street Station on Sunday morning of last week. He's an Evertonian, because all taxi drivers.
Yeah, they always are. Yeah.
And but the bigger thing with Evertonians, Liverpool, the city is a bigger thing, right? And football's a bigger thing. And the nobody really says, "Oh, it was great that we won all those trophies when you were there." The one refrain I get, and I'll let you guys go, is the one I love, and it happens all the time. They shake my hand. You say, "You made me feel closer to the club," and that's all I need.
Yeah.
That's all I need, and that's what generally comes out of.
Because that's a reflection of your job, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to you, but and as you remarked, they won because Jurgen was in charge and the players were the players, and you felt a bit of an imposter being on that bus. But your job was to run the football club, and that is a mark of you. So therefore, you're getting credit for what you did rather than what the club did as a whole. Obviously, as the custodian and the CEO, you can still take a lot of credit for what happened on the pitch as well. But that was a real mark of what you'd achieved, you personally as Peter.
Yeah, I never went to Melwood. I mean, it just like half the time I actually didn't feel very comfortable or welcome there. It's like get a Ray, and Ray and I would sit with each other on the plane half of the time. But it's like I knew my place, and it was very clear. And Jurgen, you go win games, and I'll take care of the 800 people who work for Liverpool Football Club,
Yeah.
and we'll make sure that everything moves smoothly here. So I'll let you guys go.
Well, look, you don't have to say that because we've enjoyed our time very much with you, Peter.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really
Amazing.
grateful.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers,
Peter.
guys.
See you
Take
soon.
care.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Football Journeys. Before you go, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review, a rating, or talk about us on social media. Find us on @JourneysPod. Your support helps us to make this podcast a success.